So hello, everybody. I'm Carla Wise, and I started this effort just about 6 months ago. I've been a co-leader of a chapter in Corvallis, Oregon for about 3 or 4 years, and I'm also liaison to our very left-leaning member of Congress. So I just felt there was a need within CCL to do better messaging and outreach to progressives, both in Congress and in the community at large. So that's really where this effort comes from. So next slide. You might wonder why we would need to do this. Most of us are already left-leaning in this organization. So although we say we're nonpartisan, this is what 2016, what CCL volunteers self-identified as. 80% of us said we were left of center. And yet, we have a problem, I would say, with progressives. I think the reason that we have a problem is that we've spent a lot of time focusing on how to convince conservatives that carbon pricing is the right way to go, which has been an important thing to do, and we're good at it. But I think that what tends to happen is that we forget how those messages that we've been working so hard to perfect sound to people on the left. So we sort of believed that the left would just fall in line, I think, once we got the right to embrace this. But what we're discovering is that that is actually not the case. It ain't necessarily so. We saw some real evidence of that in Washington State, which is right next door to me, last year when the left many on the left were extremely skeptical of a revenue neutral carbon fee that was proposed for the state. And we sometimes have trouble with our, I would say, with our lobby meetings with our left-leaning members of Congress. I know our chapter has. So we also have some true ideological differences that tend to come up sometimes. I think as CCLers, we tend to think that the first and most important thing is climate and getting the climate under control. And we find that that's not always the case with many folks on the left who are not within CCL. So we really need to do a better job with the left if we're going to succeed at getting a fair and effective price on carbon. So that's why we're doing this. We may, many of us, be left-leaning, but we're still, I would say, lagging behind. So there are 3 things I hope to do tonight. The first is I want to talk a little bit about differences in sort of the moral landscape of liberals versus conservatives. Many of you may be familiar with the work of Jonathan Haidt. I want to just refresh your memory on that. Then I want to talk a little bit about lessons and best practices, what works with those on the left. I've borrowed shamelessly from a number of CCLers that have said things to me or written down things in progressive outreach. And I've also used some of my own experiences. And then lastly, I've got a few bonus materials at the end after we do a little Q&A. Common stumbling blocks, trusted validators on the left. And then I want to end with talking a little bit about those who really seek out change and those who try to avoid it at all costs. Okay, so this is a book that I don't know, I actually haven't read the whole book, but I've been to a number of CCL talks where we talk about the work that Jonathan Haidt has done on the principles of moral psychology and the difference between liberals and conservatives. And his basic foundation is that morality tends to differ for those on the left and on the right. And I wanted to mention here that if you haven't read the book and if you are interested in exploring this more, there's a TED Talk that he did called The Moral Roots of Liberals and Conservatives. And I really recommend that you take a look at it. It's only 20 minutes and it sort of summarizes his whole point. So he talks about 6 moral foundations that guide us in our sense of what's right and what's wrong. And the important point here is that while many of the 1 through 4 tend to be very important for those on the right of the political spectrum, those on the left really only care, and this is a gross generalization, but they really only care about 5 and 6, about fairness and reciprocity, and about care versus harm. So I just recommend that you keep this in mind when you're talking to a liberal or a progressive, either member of Congress or audience, because much of our effort has been to use language and ideas that appeal to some of these earlier 1 through 4s. And this is really a turnoff to many liberals. So anyway, I just hope you'll refresh your thought. If you're speaking with liberal groups, this is a really good thing to go back to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about lessons and best practices. And I want to just mention the people that I've stolen ideas from. Danny Richter, Madeline Pera, Peter Joseph, Bob Norris, Jim Ryan, Edric Geis, Ron Rothbart, Marty Roach, Dick Smith, and Peter Brin. These are all CCLers who have either given talks or written things or spoken things that were really helpful in sort of thinking about what works best with liberals. So thank you to all of you. Okay, so the first thing, and this is really from Peter Brin and also from Mark Reynolds, is that first impressions are really, really important in whether we're believed and listened to. And we decide very early when we meet someone intuitively how we feel about them. Mark Reynolds has said many times that the messenger is often more important than the message. And I'm not trying to intimidate you about how you present yourself. I'm just saying that if you're going to see a progressive audience, it's really worth thinking about how you're going to introduce yourself with things about you that will appeal to the progressive people that you're meeting. So next slide, please. Oh, okay, let me just say one more thing, go back, I'm sorry. When when I first heard this idea that CCL has about presenting yourself in a way that your audience is gonna believe, I thought that it meant you had to fake, try to be fake, and that's not true at all. I don't mean that. I mean that when you don't try to be someone you're not, but think about how to make yourself relatable to your audience. And for me, that's pretty easy because I am one of those 80% of CCLers who really is quite left-leaning. And so I can use a lot of true things about me to introduce myself that are appealing to people if they have similar values. For example, I can talk about the fact that I first became really involved and committed to CCL when I really realized that the very most vulnerable among us were going to be the people who were going to suffer and perhaps die because of climate change. And I just couldn't live with that. That care harm idea is very important to me. And so, just pointing out something about yourself that you feel strongly about is a really good way to start. Okay. So this show relentless optimism. When you're talking to progressives, you have to assume that they feel bad about climate change. That's generally true, and they need hope. They need a feeling that there's something worth doing and that some progress is possible. And I believe this is needed in every venue that you are going to interact with anybody. Next slide. So with your member of Congress and their staffers, I'm sure those of you with Democrats know that have experienced this too. Democrats are frustrated and demoralized. That was true before the election. It's probably times 20 now. As Madeline has really helped me to see, they're often unaware of anything good conservatives are doing. We think our members are aware of what's going on the other side of the aisle, and honestly, all they're aware of is the stuff that they don't like. So I've been able to do a lot of good in our office just by sharing the information about the Climate Solutions Caucus, sharing information, anonymous information about how good some of our meetings are going with Republicans. It's really changed the feeling in there when we go and see them. And then now we have the Climate Leadership Council that we can talk about. And so there, this is a real important focus area, I think, of what we need to do with our liberal congressional staffers. Okay, and in the venue that you might be in where you're doing outreach and giving talks, the same thing. People really crave good news and ways to engage. This is pretty straightforward, and it's kind of the CCL way anyway. But I think it's hard to overemphasize how much this matters. When I go into an outreach event or a talk with a positive spin, I inevitably get positivity back, and people are interested. And if I'm having one of those bad days and I just don't feel that, it's a completely different experience. So I really think that's important. And I think with our chapters, for those of you who are group leaders, or even if you're just go to the meetings, I think now more than ever we really need to build each other up and to take actions, and to I think liberals and progressives really, really need a place where they're not just going to be complaining to each other. And I've honestly gotten a little bit strict in a way that I'm not always that comfortable with, of really sort of changing the subject and limiting the ability of people at our meetings to go on and on about things that are bad and they can't change. And I've found this to be a really effective strategy. Okay, next slide. So I feel like our best way to engage with progressives is to focus on the fact that Carbon Fee and Dividend is a progressive proposal. And I really think that you should use data. You should use the data we have, because it's good data and it's convincing. And that's been my experience. Next slide. This is from the household impact study. This graph shows how, you've probably all seen it before, but it shows how the lowest income quintile has by far, a much, much, much smaller carbon footprint than the top 2% or the fifth quintile. So their boost from their carbon dividend is going to be significantly positive, whereas it's really only the fifth quintile, the top 2%, and the fourth that may be putting in more money than they're getting back. So this data, I believe, is available on a district level, and there's also similar kinds of stuff from the REMI study, and I just don't think you can overutilize this when talking to progressives. So, you know, that fairness and caring values are, you know, pretty universally agreed upon along the left. So the more you can sort of listen to the concerns of progressives about revenue neutrality and about the plan, but then also make a way to share exactly what the impact of carbon fee and dividend is on the lower income quintiles, I think it's the most effective way I've found. Go ahead. Okay, so use the REMI and the household impact study, and you know, I wouldn't try to convince people that it does a perfect job, because it doesn't, but you know, it does a pretty good job. And then look at the impacts in your congressional district, because that's really important, and it's really cool that we have that on a district by district basis. And I have to say, our meeting with our member when we showed the staffers that went really well. So because the left values fairness and caring for the most vulnerable, consider the following. The phrase net progressive effect is one that we really like when we're talking about this in our chapter. And then also, you know, sometimes it's upsetting to progressives sometimes when they hear that Bill Gates is going to get a dividend along with everybody else. But another way of effectively, I think, communicating about this is that if we share the dividend equally, then most Americans, particularly low and middle income, will break even or come out ahead. That's why the monthly dividend is so important. You know, this isn't going to convince all progressives, but it does really help, I've found, with a lot of people. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about language, because this is something I've been really thinking about a lot since starting the progressive outreach team. The language that we use is really quite powerful, even when we're not thinking about it. And I think in CCL, we've done a lot of sort of unconscious using of the term market-friendly, market-based. That's not language that tends to go over well with a lot of progressives. And I want to just talk about what I found to be some better terms to use with progressives. So first of all households is a much more likely to sound good to progressives than American households. Again, we're inclusive. Corrective to the market is a much more progressive friendly wording than market-based, market-friendly, free market. So that's another one, and it's also true. Another way to describe our proposal is equal incentive for everyone to be carbon virtuous. Let's see what's next. I like this one a lot, because I find that that using the word transformative on a rising carbon fee is something that's not upsetting to progressives. And really, if the fee continues to rise, it will be transformative. We all know that. We tend to not say that to conservative audiences because it tends to be more, they don't like that kind of thinking, but I think anyway, I like that, using that with progressive groups. And then this is one I think that I feel pretty strongly about. So, and I think it appeals to a lot of progressive people. Lowest income people will suffer the most from climate change. So they have the most to gain from swift transformative carbon pricing. I think when you talk about the slowness of any other approach than a rapidly rising carbon fee and dividend, you have to talk about the slowness of reducing emissions and the slowness of actually getting climate change under control, and who's going to be harmed by that. Okay, so next I want to talk about, next one. Thanks. Okay, this is another thing that's, this is particularly from Danny Richter, who really taught me this. It's really important not to dismiss the Clean Power Plan when you're talking to progressive audiences, progressive members of Congress, progressive groups of any kind. Many of people, you know, left of center, worked very, very hard for the Clean Power Plan and have no interest in hearing it dismissed, or no interest in hearing that it didn't really do much, or that it's fine if it goes away. It's just not a good way to talk to liberals. So let's see. This is just a summary of what I've just talked about. Becoming a trusted messenger, talk about, you know, what brought you to CCL, or what your particular caring is, and do it right up front. Show relentless optimism, focus on the progressive nature of carbon fee and dividend on income. Be careful of your language, and don't reject the Clean Power Plan. This is just a very quick start to some things that I've learned from other CCLers and from working with my liberal group, but okay. Okay, just a few more slides. This is the bonus material portion. Okay, I just wanted to bring these things up. They're not, they're actually not really anything, they're just a few thoughts. I wanted to just mention a few stumbling blocks, gross generalizations about progressives and stumbling blocks. And I don't have the answers to these. I just am telling you that in my experience, these have been kind of good to know about. Many progressives don't trust markets, period. They just don't trust markets to do the right thing, even with the carbon price. And as I just said, many are against revenue neutrality. They think the revenue should be kept and done good things with. And then for next week, there's going to be an environmental justice webinar, and some in the progressive community align with frontline communities who have experienced environmental racism and feel very strongly that climate solutions must directly address environmental justice. This is one of the issues that came up in Washington State, and this, if you're interested in this aspect, you should really go to be at the webinar next week. And then, I don't know if you all have been in meetings, but I've certainly been in meetings where it's like they want nuclear power off the table, period. That's pretty common among progressives. CCL is agnostic about that. And then this is really, really common in my experience. They just believe that working with Republicans is impossible. So, you know, we're tilting at windmills. So those are some things that I've come up against that I just want to point out to you. And then concern about the rural poor. This is the rural poor one is one place where sometimes Republicans and Democrats are both concerned about the rural poor. So this is kind of an interesting one. Okay. I want to point out to you that CCL's most famous spokespeople are mostly conservatives. This is a big problem in winning over the left. If you're giving a talk or doing any kind of outreach with progressive members of Congress or progressive groups, use someone that the left admires. Next slide. We have President Obama saying we have to price carbon. We have the Pope Francis, basically saying the same thing, only when he's really making a case for pricing carbon. So these are really good people to cite when you're talking to liberals. And then we also have something else that we never use, which is that I don't know, 9 different or 10, let's see, different bills have been introduced by Democrats and a few Republicans to price carbon. So we have some very trusted validators. Bernie Sanders, Barbara Boxer, all these people have tried to price carbon. So this is important for us to use. And then finally, I just wanted to end with this. And this is something, if you watch the TED Talk, this really interests me. Conservatives in general are change averse, and liberals in general seek out new experiences. Of course, another gross generalization. But when we describe carbon fee and dividend as a simple, fair solution that will essentially leave everything as it is except to transition us away from greenhouse gas emissions, think about how that sounds to people who are seeking new experiences or who want change. And then just think about how you want to present it. Okay, that's the end.